Hello and welcome. Indian companies are making the transition to digital. Many of them are working with clients who are demanding more and more digital solutions. But with this transition, whether it's a company or the client on the other side, comes the interesting threat of cybersecurity. And that's something that many companies are grappling with and wondering how to fix it or find solutions. To discuss this and understand this space a little better, I'm joined by Akhilesh Tuteja, Global Co-Head of Cybersecurity at KPMG and also looks after the IT and BPO space. Akhilesh, thank you very much for joining us. So if I were to ask you about the most significant trends when it comes to cybersecurity today, in terms of the kind of threats companies face and what they're doing about it, what would they be?
The first and foremost significant trend of cybersecurity is that it's no more a technology issue and it's become a business survival issue. So if you actually look at it in the past, people looked at it saying, okay, if you don't have good security, maybe some of your information can at best be lost. But if you really study the last 3 years, the significant cyber incidents have not caused just information loss, have not just caused loss of money, but have actually caused shutdown of businesses. If not shut down, in many cases, they've caused significant erosion to the capital, to the market capitalization or to their profits. There are several examples. That's one big trend. In fact, if you look at the World Economic Forum report, they treat it as the top 3 business risks globally, and the number 1 and number 2 being a climate change and the natural disaster. So it's like come next to the possibly the first man-made and the largest man-made business risk today. So that's the first big trend. The second big trend is that in the past, people used to say that if you got to fix certain thing, put more technology to it. I think that's moved on because technology cannot solve all the problem. So the real change which has to happen is the way we run our business and more importantly the human factor. So if you look at it, if you study most of the instances, they haven't caused because technology failed. They're caused because people who run, maintain, operate those technology actually didn't do what they were supposed to do. So those are the couple of very interesting trends.
And how is this panning out in India?
India is nowhere different from the global players. So if you look at it, the digital disruption in India is as much as what's happening globally. If you look at a couple of instances, and I'll talk about some of them, if you look at ransomware, that's been a one big significant threat. And if you look at the ransomware attacks in India, they're also as much as what's happening globally. The second one, if you look at it, some of these viruses or malwares, which earlier in the past used to infect computer systems, but are now actually infecting devices, plants and many other things. So if you look at some of these examples of power plant and many other things, India is not separated from that. So you see a lot of those.
But we're not reading much about this or hearing much about it because it's unreported.
I would say part of it is unreported and also part of it gets detected sometimes in a timely manner. So you really don't see a complete shutdown, but I think there are enough examples of that which happened in India.
So what's the level of preparedness in India and perhaps the rest of the world today as you see it? And as we see more the advent of artificial intelligence and let's say machine learning and all of that in the transition space as companies transit, are we getting more exposed or less exposed?
Sure. Interesting question. We have actually been studying this trend for the last 3 years consistently. So we run what we call a global CEO survey and where we ask people of how prepared they are and how vulnerable they are. Interestingly, for the 2 years in a row, India has appeared to be considered more prepared than the rest of their global peers. And we actually did a deep dive on it and we said that, why is it that the CEO, because the CEO perception survey, why do they believe that the Indian companies are more prepared, not more secure, but more prepared to deal with an incident? We actually realized that it's one of those where we say sometimes a false sense of assurance when you have done something about it. So it's like saying, if you built an IKEA furniture yourself, you feel that's a better furniture than anything which you bought. And the same thing works. So about 3 years ago, a lot of companies in India at the really top level started investing in it. And when you invest in something, you feel I've taken care of it because the incident hasn't happened. But we have realized that sometimes that false sense of assurance gets crashed when an incident happened and then people realize that how underprepared they were. So to answer your question, yes, they feel more prepared, but equally important, the threat landscape is growing very, very fast.
And are you seeing some industries more vulnerable? I mean, obviously banking comes to mind first, but are you seeing more industries?
Yes, absolutely. So if I would look at it, I can divide into 2 categories, the mainstream or the classical industries, which is typically banking, telecom and healthcare. But I'll talk about some of these new categories that are getting shifted here. So banking and financial, everybody knows. I think telco is a very interesting story because in telco world, they actually have to live with what is called the backward compatibility expectation. So if you go back to your home and if you find time, find out the oldest phone you ever owned. Maybe it's a Nokia, maybe it's something which used to work on a 3-line black and white display. You pick it up, try and insert a new battery, put a SIM, switch it on, it'll work. You can actually make a phone call. Now that phone used to work on 1.5G, and today we are talking about 4G everywhere and 5G too. So 3G was more secure than 2G, 4G is more secure than 3G, and 5G hopefully will be more. But because of the telecommunication network allowing backward compatibility since beginning, how do you deal with that? You may have made the technology less vulnerable, but you're still allowing because it's a method of inclusion. So a 1.5G phone also has to connect to a new network. That I think is a vulnerability which is hard to deal with. It's not impossible, but that's a harder to deal with. So that's the uniqueness about the telco industry. Healthcare is a fragmented industry, it's getting mature, so I think that's the issue. But if I have to talk about the new industries which are getting added to it, one of course, no prizes for guessing, is the internet businesses. Because those are not because they are easy to break in, but they are potentially having higher motivation, and the speed of getting something wrong is very, very high. Also, if you look at it in the past, people did not breach many businesses because if you study the kidnapping attempt in the US, which is where a lot of structured data is available, most of the kidnapping attempts fail not because you couldn't catch somebody, not because you couldn't find the ransom, they fail because you couldn't collect the ransom. Because when you go to the collection point, you get caught. And that used to be the situation in the banking system as well. You can defraud anybody, but when you have to go to the bank to withdraw money, you'll get caught. Now with the cryptocurrency, I think that risk is going away. In some ways, you don't need to withdraw money. You could deal money in a cryptocurrency. So I think that's the second.
But that's an interesting analogy that you've drawn. I mean, between a kidnapping and a bank.
That's how, because in the kidnapping also, unlike a normal attack where you have to collect money from where the money belongs, in the kidnapping you could collect money where you want it to be. And that's how it happens in the internet business. And we see the cryptocurrency having a big impact on the rate of fraud going up.
Right. And if we were to look at the Indian landscape again, now, we've been seeing a big bank fraud recently, which of course is not to do with cybersecurity, but this is the kind of thing that makes everyone alert about systems in general.
Absolutely.
So what are the areas that you think we should be focusing on? So as customers, consumers, we too feel safe that our money is safe, our data with databases is safe, our phone accounts are not hacked.
Yeah, so I would say that you could divide the problem solution into two parts. Things which the provider should do and things which we as the consumer should do. I think the things which providers should do are rather easier because there are fewer people to control and they know how to control. I think the trouble is with the consumer as to consumers are not educated and many times the fraud happens there. So on the supplier side or the provider side, I think you took a good example of this particular fraud. I would actually say it's a big technology fraud in some ways because this fraud occurred because of the lack of integration. So in some ways, cyber is one area where we are talking to people saying that, make it as, like, again, I did a session on blockchain today. The concept of blockchain is that both these sides of the transaction get settled at the same time. So it doesn't happen that you supply the good and the money comes later, which is the classical world. So the blockchain kind of converging the two ends of the settlement transaction. So I think there are some good solutions available there. But coming back to what the consumer should do, in my view, and especially in the internet businesses, wallets and all of that, they're making life very, very convenient, but also many times very insecure. So my dumb advice to every friend I have is saying that don't give away your phone, even to your darling wife, sorry, a spouse. Because not that you don't trust her or him, but I think there are a lot of issues which can go wrong. Because if you actually parted with your phone with a stranger just for 15 seconds,
that's enough.
If the guy is smart enough, he can actually take it away forever and you will never know. There will be entire monitoring happening. But on a more serious note, actually, some of these wallet companies have made life easier. So they would make the wallets more and more feature rich and will allow you to do certain things. Be very cautious. One classic example I've seen in the past, if you were to transition money from one wallet to another or charge your wallet, you had to type in your credit card number. And they came over saying, okay, you don't need to, you can actually save the card. And at that point in time, they say that if you want to save, there's a tick. And that tick was generally unticked. Next phase, they say, okay, tick is, by the way, tick unless you untick it. And now the world has come where the tick is always on and it's not on the main screen, it's actually somewhere deep down in the settings. So you got to be very careful dealing with these new age technologies.
Right, these are wonderful insights, Akhilesh. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Enjoyed. Thank you.